Have you ever noticed how some people walk through life as if they're stuck on a dark path, and no matter where they turn, that black line follows them like a shadow they don't question anymore? They wake up, and the first thought isn't, "What's possible today?" It's, "What could go wrong?" And even if the sun is shining, they'll check the forecast for storms that haven't happened yet. I once worked with a man who told me, "Nothing good lasts for me. Every time I feel hope, something breaks." To him, every compliment was suspicious, every opportunity, temporary. Success? Just a lucky accident. Failure? Proof he was never enough. His mind was like a courtroom where he was always on trial, and the verdict was always guilt. And here's the twist, he wasn't cursed. He was conditioned. You see, when we repeat the same thought patterns over and over, especially the negative ones, our brain forms what neuroscientists call reinforced neural pathways. Think of it as a trail in the forest. The more you walk it, the clearer it gets. The darker the thought, the more likely your brain is to default to it. The amygdala, the part of your brain that reacts to fear, starts to light up more often. Your stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, don't just show up during danger. They become your everyday fuel. You're not just living anymore. You're surviving the day like it's a battlefield. But as Dale Carnegie once said, "You are not what happened to you, you are what you choose to focus on." So let me ask you something no one dares to. What does the black line give you that the white one doesn't? Because there's a reason we cling to pain, it's familiar. We wear it like armor, thinking it protects us, when in reality it just keeps joy out. And maybe, just maybe, the white line has been beside you all along. But your eyes were trained to find shadows, not light. We'll come back to this. Because next time, we need to ask something even harder. Why does your brain fear happiness more than failure? Have you ever wondered why the idea of happiness feels more dangerous than failure? It sounds absurd, doesn't it? But think for a moment. How many times have you self-sabotaged just when things started to go well? How often have you questioned joy, doubted peace, or walked away from something that felt right? Not because it was wrong, but because it felt unfamiliar. You see, we often fear not what hurts us, but what changes us. One of my clients once got a promotion he had worked toward for 3 years. He smiled politely, nodded through congratulations, and then disappeared for 2 weeks. When he came back, he told me, "I couldn't breathe. I kept waiting for the fall." That wasn't anxiety, it was conditioning. His nervous system had learned to regulate itself through stress. Calm felt unnatural. Joy felt like a setup. Biochemically, this isn't mystery, it's memory. Your brain is a prediction machine. If your history is built on chaos, your mind learns to expect chaos. Dopamine, the chemical of anticipation, doesn't just respond to rewards. It responds to patterns. So if your pattern has been loss, disappointment, abandonment, then your brain begins to crave familiarity, even when it hurts. Let me say that again. Sometimes your mind would rather repeat pain it understands than embrace peace it doesn't trust. Dale Carnegie believed that we aren't driven by logic, we're driven by emotion, by story. And if your inner story says, "Good things don't last," then every moment of joy feels like a ticking clock. You don't enjoy it, you brace for its ending. But here's a gentle truth you may not want to hear. You don't fear happiness because it's fragile. You fear it because you don't believe you're allowed to keep it. So I'll leave you with this. What if peace isn't a finish line, but a skill you haven't practiced yet? Because the black line you walk may not be destiny, it may just be muscle memory. And next time, we need to talk about that voice in your head, the one that sounds like you, but was never truly yours. Somewhere along the way, a voice settled in your mind, soft at first, maybe even helpful, like an older brother warning you not to get too excited, not to dream too far, not to reach for too much, and over time, that voice stopped whispering and started narrating your entire life. It doesn't scream, it doesn't argue, it simply states things like facts: you're not enough. This will never last. They don't really care. You always mess it up. And here's the part that hurts the most: that voice sounds like you. It mimics your tone, borrows your memories, dresses up like logic, and tells you that it's just being realistic. But realism doesn't choke hope before it breathes, and logic doesn't flood your chest with quiet panic when something good starts to happen. That voice was formed, not born. It's an echo of moments when you needed comfort but were met with silence, of chances you took that were met with rejection, of childhood lessons dressed up as love that were actually caution disguised as care. And now, it's the lens through which you see everything. Your brain, built for survival, records emotion faster than fact, and repetition becomes reality. Every time you listen to that voice, you strengthen the neural loop behind it, reinforcing the idea that fear equals safety and doubt equals protection. In that way, pain becomes familiar terrain. The mind learns that avoiding disappointment is better than risking fulfillment, and the tragedy is, most people will live their whole lives choosing safety over connection, control over surrender, tension over peace. But Dale Carnegie always spoke of courage, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet, daily rebellion against that internal script. He believed that we could retrain our perception by choosing, over and over again, to doubt the voice of fear, to interrupt its rhythm, to ask simple but radical questions.
Your subscription and comment aren't just numbers. They're signals that decide what video comes next. Share your thoughts or ideas in the comments. They often become the foundation for news stories. Interestingly, over 90% of viewers watch my videos without subscribing. That's okay. It means the content pulls you in. But subscribing helps you stay updated with the next parts. Hit subscribe, and let's create the next video together.
Questions like, what if that's not true anymore? Or, whose voice is this, really? You were not born with shame. You inherited it. You were not born to shrink. You were taught to. So now, the question becomes painfully honest. If that voice inside you isn't yours, then who have you been living for all this time? Next, we'll go even deeper, not into the past, but into what happens when you finally begin to move without that voice guiding your steps, and how the silence that follows can feel more terrifying than the noise you've known your whole life. When the voice that once dictated your every thought begins to fade, even slightly, what follows is not immediate relief, but an eerie kind of silence. A space so unfamiliar that it feels like standing alone in a room you've never entered, filled with light you're not sure you deserve, and for a moment, that stillness doesn't feel peaceful at all. It feels like danger, because now you're without the one thing that always told you what to expect, even if what it expected was pain. And in that first stretch of quiet, your instincts might tell you to run back, to the noise, to the pattern, to the version of yourself who always had a reason to stay small, to worry, to apologize for existing too loudly. But if you stay still long enough, if you don't fill that void with old beliefs, you'll notice something most people never do, that beneath all the fear, there was always a second voice, softer, slower, hesitant at first. Not pushing you forward, but gently asking, what if? You're safe now? The brain resists this softness. It was trained to scan for threat, to repeat pain because pain once meant awareness, and awareness meant survival. But in a life where the threats are no longer tigers but unanswered messages, side glances, memories of rejection replayed like documentaries, you're not surviving the world, you're surviving your own expectations of it. Cortisol doesn't know the difference between emotional and physical danger. The same systems fire whether you're running from a predator or avoiding eye contact at dinner, and the longer those chemicals run, the more your identity bonds with them. You begin to think your anxiety is you. You begin to fear healing because it means shedding the skin you've learned to live inside. Carnegie often reminded people that confidence isn't born, it's practiced, not by performing strength but by meeting fear with presence, by showing up to the moment unarmored, even if your hands shake. He didn't teach people to become someone new. He taught them to return to the version of themselves that existed before the noise, before the pretending, before the edits made to fit into places that never really welcomed them. So when the voice falls quiet, and the stillness unnerves you, don't rush to replace it. Let it echo. Let it teach you how to live without being managed. And ask yourself this. If I didn't have to protect myself all the time, who would I become? Next, we'll talk about that exact thing, how letting go of control isn't weakness, but the beginning of real power. The kind that doesn't need to be proven to anyone, not even yourself. Control has a way of disguising itself as strength. It looks like discipline. Sounds like planning. Feels like safety. But what it often hides is fear. The kind of fear that doesn't shout but tightens your chest when things don't go exactly as expected. The kind that doesn't paralyze you outright but forces you to micromanage every outcome because deep down, you believe if you don't hold everything together, it will all fall apart. And worse, maybe it will fall apart because of you. People don't become controlling because they're power hungry. They become controlling because something once hurt them deeply when they had no control at all. I remember a woman who couldn't rest. She scheduled every hour of her life, even her relaxation time. Her meals were weighed, her plans detailed down to which parking lot she'd use. And when I asked her what would happen if she just didn't plan something, her hands trembled slightly and she said, "I'm scared I'll disappear." That wasn't obsession. That was trauma speaking. That was a nervous system wired to believe that stillness was dangerous, and unpredictability meant pain. Neuroscience calls it hypervigilance. It's when your brain's threat detection system never powers down. The prefrontal cortex, your logic, your reasoning, keeps trying to manage life like a chessboard, while your limbic system, the emotional core, keeps whispering that any move could be the wrong one. And so, you plan not because you're confident, but because your brain believes planning is the only thing standing between you and collapse. But Dale Carnegie always knew something that many of us forget: real power isn't in controlling life. It's in knowing you'll adapt, even if life doesn't go to plan. Confidence is not knowing everything will go right. It's knowing you'll still be you even if it doesn't. Letting go of control isn't passivity, it's a decision to stop living on high alert, to stop trying to outrun every possible disappointment before it arrives. And that's terrifying at first, because if you're not managing everything, then who's protecting you? But here's the part most people don't see coming. When you stop controlling life, life begins to breathe with you. You stop reacting and start choosing. You stop gripping and start holding. You stop bracing and finally start being. So ask yourself, not with guilt, not with shame: if I let go of this need to control, would I fall apart? Or would I fall into something softer? Something real? Because in the next part, we'll go there. We'll explore the space you've been avoiding the longest, what it feels like to finally trust again, even just yourself. Trust isn't built in a single moment, it's grown in the smallest ones, in the pauses where you don't shut down, in the seconds you don't pull away, in the mornings where you wake up and, just for a breath or two, don't expect something to go wrong. But for many of us, trust isn't something we lost, it's something we were never taught to feel safe inside. I worked once with a man who told me he'd never been truly angry, never truly vulnerable, never truly honest, not because he didn't want to be, but because he learned early that being real meant being hurt. He didn't fake his life out of pride. He did it to survive. And every time someone got close, his nervous system would respond with withdrawal masked as calm, with silence disguised as composure, with politeness that hid his panic. He was always kind, always capable, always available, but never there. That's what happens when the foundation of your emotional home was built on caution. Your body remembers what your mind tries to forget. It remembers the unpredictability, the disappointment, the times someone promised and didn't follow through. And every time something new and good enters your life, it doesn't feel like opportunity, it feels like threat. Not because it is, but because it doesn't match the shape of the world your system expects. Biologically, this is more than memory, it's programming. The vagus nerve, which governs the body's safety response, becomes hypersensitive. It's not just in your head, it's in your chest, your breath, your stomach. That feeling of unease when things go well? That's your body checking. Are we sure this is okay? Your mind might say yes. But your body hesitates, because trust isn't a thought. It's a felt sense. And for many, that sense hasn't been visited in years. Carnegie didn't teach people to pretend they were fearless. He taught them to act with dignity in the presence of fear. To extend belief to themselves, one gesture at a time. Not blind belief, but courageous trial. He'd say, "Action breeds confidence." And he meant, start small. Trust doesn't require a leap. It begins when you speak what you usually suppress, when you rest without guilt, when you show someone a corner of your truth and stay long enough to see that the world doesn't crumble when you're honest. So I'll ask you now gently. When was the last time you trusted a moment, without preparing for its ending? And what part of you still flinches when things feel right? Next time, we'll talk about the price of guarding yourself for too long, and how self-protection, when left unchecked, becomes self-abandonment in disguise. There's a quiet kind of grief that builds up over the years, not from what others did to you, but from what you slowly stopped allowing yourself to feel. And it doesn't scream. It hums. In your routines. In your automatic answers. In the way you smile and nod, even when something inside you feels miles away. That's what long-term self-protection does. It doesn't just shield you from pain. It slowly erases the parts of you that once reached out without hesitation. You don't wake up one day and realize you've been gone. It happens gradually. You cancel the call. You avoid the subject. You delay the conversation. You rehearse every word in your head before you let it pass your lips. Not because you're fake, but because every raw piece of you has learned the risk of exposure. Somewhere along the way, you became your own guardrail, your own filter, your own critic. You didn't just protect yourself from others, you started protecting others from you. That's the tragedy of long-term emotional armor. It works. It keeps you safe. It gets you through. But over time, it doesn't just block out danger. It blocks out life. Joy can't get in. Connection bounces off. And eventually, even you can't find your way back to what you actually feel, because the muscle of suppression becomes stronger than the muscle of expression. Neuroscience explains this through emotional suppression patterns. When the brain learns, often from childhood, that showing sadness, anger, need, or fear leads to withdrawal, rejection, or punishment, it starts preemptively numbing those signals. The prefrontal cortex becomes overdeveloped in controlling emotional output, while the amygdala continues to scan for risk. You become composed. You become high-functioning. You become the person everyone relies on, but you forget how to rely on anyone, including yourself. And this is where Dale Carnegie's wisdom often went deeper than most noticed. He didn't teach people to win friends by being perfect. He taught them to be human, to express their needs, to say, "I don't know," to admit, "I need help," and most of all, to stop pretending that strength equals silence. Because the real damage isn't in being vulnerable. The damage comes when we bury that vulnerability so deep that we no longer recognize it as ours. So let me ask you, with all the gentleness this moment deserves. If your walls could speak, what would they say about what they've kept out, not just what they've kept away? And if your strength has become your hiding place, then what part of you is still waiting to be found? Next, we'll explore what happens when you begin to unlearn that protection, not by tearing it down, but by building something softer underneath it, something that can hold you when everything else is uncertain. Learning how to be soft again after years of bracing is not an awakening, it's a relearning, and it's not loud. It's quiet. Almost imperceptible at first. Like catching yourself before an apology you didn't owe. Like staying 5 seconds longer in a conversation where you'd usually retreat. Like breathing without the weight of preparation pressing on your chest. The world doesn't change when you do this. But the way the world feels starts to shift. People think letting go of self-protection means dropping all your boundaries at once, tearing down walls with trembling hands and saying, "I'm ready." But that's not healing. That's another performance. The truth is, you don't break the armor. You simply stop tightening it. You start by recognizing that protection isn't wrong. It just isn't the only way anymore. I once spoke to a man who told me he hadn't cried in over a decade. Not at funerals. Not in arguments. Not even in moments of beauty. And when I asked him why, he said, "I don't know how to start." That wasn't a lack of emotion. That was a nervous system that forgot how to release. Emotion that's been stored for too long doesn't just vanish. It waits. In the muscles. In the stomach. In the voice that cracks for no reason during small talk. In the urge to be busy all the time. That's not laziness or coldness. That's grief, unprocessed and unspoken, turning into habit. Biologically, this is known as emotional repression. The body, in its wisdom, reroutes emotional signals to avoid overwhelm. You'll feel it as tension in the shoulders, chronic fatigue, digestive issues, restlessness that never quite calms. Your logical brain might say, "I'm just tired." But your body has been trying to say something deeper for years. "Please notice me. Please stop outrunning me." Carnegie believed in action, not the explosive kind, but the repeated, kind gesture toward yourself that builds trust over time. His method wasn't about transformation overnight. It was about courage in everyday moments. Choosing to soften when it would be easier to stay guarded. Choosing to speak when it would be safer to stay silent. Choosing to stay when your instinct is to run, not because the world is safe, but because you are finally willing to stop leaving yourself behind. So here's a quiet question for tonight. What if you didn't need to be healed to be held? What if the beginning of softness isn't being unbreakable, but simply being willing to stop pretending you've never been broken? Next time, we'll talk about something most avoid their entire lives: how to receive. Not gratitude, not compliments, but care, without shrinking, deflecting, or earning it. Most people aren't afraid of being alone. They're afraid of what might happen if someone stays. Because staying means they might see you, all of you, not just the polished version you've worked so hard to become, but the one underneath who sometimes doubts, sometimes aches, sometimes questions their own worth, even in the arms of love. And so, we push away what we want the most. Not because we don't want it, but because we never learn how to receive it without feeling like a fraud. Receiving care, real care, not transactional, not performative, requires a different kind of strength than giving. Giving keeps you in control. Receiving? It demands surrender. It forces you to stand still as someone meets you in your unguarded state. And for many, that's terrifying. Not because love is scary, but because their nervous system still remembers a time when being open meant being dropped. I remember a client who said, "When someone gives me a compliment, I feel like I owe them something." And there it was, the core wound of receiving. That care has to be deserved, earned, balanced out. But Carnegie used to say, a person's deepest need is to feel important. Not to prove they're important. Just to feel it. But how can you feel it if your default reaction is to deflect every drop of kindness like it's radioactive? From a physiological view, this isn't weakness, it's protection gone too far. Your body registers vulnerability not as connection but as exposure. The parasympathetic nervous system, responsible for rest, trust, and openness, is underused, like a language you once knew but stopped speaking. And so, every time someone reaches toward you, a part of you recoils, scans for motives, waits for the other shoe to drop. Because that's what you were taught, nothing comes without cost. But not everything has to be earned. Some things are given because you're already worthy. Not for what you do, not for how well you perform, but for who you are when all the masks fall away and you're just human. So here's the invitation, one you may have never truly heard before. What if you didn't need to apologize for being loved? What if care didn't make you weaker but more real? Next time, we'll reach the final step of this journey, not a conclusion, but a turning point, where we ask, finally, not who you were while surviving, but who you're becoming now that you've stopped hiding. You spend so long surviving, performing, managing your way through life, that the idea of simply being starts to feel foreign, almost irresponsible. But eventually, if you stay present long enough, a shift begins, not with a thunderclap, not with a sudden breakthrough, but with the realization that you're tired of negotiating your existence. Tired of proving. Tired of waiting for permission to rest. And in that quiet exhaustion, something unexpected happens. You start to wonder who you are without the armor. Who are you when you're not anticipating pain? When you're not editing your words for comfort? When you're not shrinking to be accepted? For most, that question has no immediate answer, because their identity has always been wrapped around what they could survive, not what they could allow. And this is where the real work begins. Not in fixing yourself, but in meeting yourself. Without urgency. Without judgment. Without rushing to make meaning from every moment. Biologically, this is the space where healing begins to take root, when the nervous system stops anticipating threat and starts recognizing safety. Not because danger has vanished, but because you've taught your body how to feel safe inside yourself. That's a different kind of power. One that doesn't need applause. One that doesn't depend on external validation. It's subtle. Unshakable. Earned not through performance, but through presence. Dale Carnegie never spoke in the language of therapy or neuroscience. But he understood something essential about human nature. We all want to feel seen, heard, and valued, not for who we pretend to be, but for who we are when we finally stop pretending. So here we are, after the walls, the voice, the silence, the control, the softness, the fear, the trust. What's left? You. Not the version molded by pain. Not the shadow shaped by caution. Just you, real, unsure, present. And that is enough. So I'll leave you with this, not as advice, but as a mirror. Who are you becoming now that you've stopped surviving? And what would it mean to build a life where you're not constantly earning the right to exist, but simply living it? This isn't the end of your story, brother. It's just the first page where you finally get to write it in your own voice.